Hello, I'm Soicat and welcome back to my second channel geography video. This is a series where I talk about geography and the world and stuff. And today I want to continue on my series where I talk about every single border that a country does have by talking about the one and only official mainland UK border, which is also the only border that the country of Ireland does have. So both these countries border each other on the island of Ireland, where, by the way, because a lot of people get confused here, there is two separate political entities. There is Northern Ireland, which is a part of the UK, which is full name, by the way, is the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And there is Ireland, which is a separate, free, independent country to the south. It's sometimes called the Free State or the Republic of Ireland, but it's just known as Ireland. So now we've got it out of the way, there are two separate countries on this island, which means between the two, there is an international border. And this international border is interesting for a whole bunch of reasons. Not only because it has some weird anomalies. Look at this road, for instance. It starts in Ireland, goes into Northern Ireland, goes back into Ireland, back into Northern Ireland, and then back into Ireland again. Kind of weird that you can cross the border 4 times in less than 10 kilometers between Ireland and the UK. But there's also a bunch of other weird anomalies like this that do result from the fact that it's a new border that stems from something very, very old. But as well as talking about the anomalies, the history, and all that, like I like to do on this border series, I figured I'd talk about the geopolitical consequences of this border, because for the UK, this is one of the biggest issues right now. The border between Ireland and the UK is the big issue for both sides as the UK attempts, the whole Brexit thing I'm sure you've heard something about, but negotiating Brexit has big issues when it comes to this land border, because this will be a border between a EU country and a non-EU country, and given the sensitivities of Northern Ireland, given the current political situation, that's going to cause a whole range of issues that I want to explain after we've gone through the history, because I think that's important to explain the rest. So with that said, I also need to clarify, at the very start here, I am a quarter Irish. I have an Irish grandfather, and I also have family that live in Northern Ireland. They live just north of Belfast, so I've visited them a few times. I've been to Ireland several times, and I like both countries a lot. I like both, I've been to Belfast and Dublin quite a few times. I think they're both pretty swell places, and I'm not here to promote some weird propaganda. A lot of people on the internet, when this comes up, it's a hugely controversial issue because their parents or their grandparents, maybe they even fought or died or something, and therefore it's been ingrained in them that this is a big deal. They need to fight the other side to the death. But in my opinion, it's an issue for the Irish and the Northern Irish people to deal with on their own, behalf. That's a whole separate thing for them. But today I want to talk about the actual facts of it so we can learn and so we can see the interesting things that have developed as a result of the border. So yeah, with that said, let's talk about how the border came to be. Because all of this border, unlike most borders, which kind of changed bit by treaty change, most of this border kind of came about all at the same time, because although the border only officially came into being less than 100 years ago now, so it's a pretty recent border in that way, it's also a very old border because it came from a border which was drawn over 400 years ago. So you need to understand the very basic history of the fact that Ireland, although it's officially always, for a very long time, has always been conquered by England and Wales, it was never really officially conquered. Even though it was technically a part of the UK, it was never really actually, controlled in any way, and most of Ireland very much was anti-English. And the most anti-English and anti-Protestant part of the UK was actually, interestingly enough, the north. Again, it seems like a reverse upon day times, but the north of Ireland was the most anti-Protestant, which is why when, there was a big war there, and it was fought just over 400 years ago, when the, the anti-English element was kind of like driven out, the lords left for Italy and kind of died in exile. When that whole thing happened, the English decided to redraw the boundaries, and the boundaries they decided to redraw are these ones right here. As you can see, they divided into 4 separate provinces and 32 separate counties, most of which remain to this day in pretty much the same form. There have obviously been some tiny changes here and there, but this is mostly what the boundaries of Ireland are today, split into 4 provinces, which don't really mean too much anymore. This is why people by the way call Northern Ireland Ulster, because most of Northern Ireland is inside Ulster, not all of it, it's not a correct term, and yeah, these are also where the counties from today do stem from. So now you know how that happened. 400 years ago, some counties were drawn, kind of arbitrarily, but also based on local land, ownings and stuff like that, and that is how the counties of Northern Ireland came to be. So, and Ireland also came to be. So, with that said, the borders between the 6 most northern counties, or the 6 counties in Northern Ireland today, and those of Ireland are the ones which define the border. But how did it come to be that 6 counties of Northern Ireland left Ireland, or how did it come to be that 26 counties of Ireland left the UK, whichever way you want to say that? And the simple explanation for this one is that as Northern Ireland slowly became more and more Protestant, like I said, because it was the most anti-Protestant bit, it's where the plantation efforts and the anti-Catholic laws and all that sort of stuff took hold the most, and it meant that over time, the demographic shift, which always happens in these sorts of things, slowly meant this area was the most unionist, most pro-UK part of the part of Ireland, I should say. I mean, maybe off the UK as a whole, but or mostly off Ireland. So with that said, these parts of the UK, these parts of Ireland, were more and more in favour of staying in part of the the Union, staying a part of the United Kingdom, while the rest of Ireland, over time, developed a kind of like a home rule sentiment. They wanted to rule themselves rather than be ruled from London, and this grew and grew and grew and grew until the point where it actually developed from being just a like a, oh yeah, we want home rule, to we want full-on independence. And the last election of when Ireland was in the UK, the Irish election of 1918. Again, this was to represent them in the UK Parliament because Ireland was a part of the UK at this point. The UK's former name was the United Kingdom of Great Britain, and Ireland, Ireland as a whole. You can see how in this last election that they did hold, Sinn Féin, the Irish let's call them the Irish nationalists, but like the Irish Independence Party, to keep things simple, they were the party which dominated the island. There was, over 70% of the vote for them, and you can see how just huge swaths of Ireland purely voted for Sinn Féin. However, you can also see, looking to the north, there's a lot of people who voted for the more moderate IPP up here, as well as a lot of, areas, in particular Ulster, which voted for the Irish Unionists. And also, by the way, because a lot of people don't mention this, if you look on the map, also a few areas in Dublin, in particular, voted for the Unionists as well. TCD, which is Trinity College Dublin, which was a weird, double member parliamentary constituency, so they got 2 members because it was that big. Both of them voted for Irish Unionists and independent Unionist parties. So some parts of the rest of Ireland, and obviously in all of these seats, there was a lot of people that kind of wanted unionism but were outweighed by the nationalists. And then there were a few constituencies where there were more unionists than than nationalists, which is interesting. But it does mean that Ireland as a whole wanted independence, and because of this, the British government at the time, kind of as like a compromise, a temporary solution was going to be, okay, we'll give them home rule, we'll give the Irish home rule, but because the north of Ireland, the Unionist part, as you can see right here, is very much opposed to that, it looks like it's almost going to start a civil war. A simple solution was going to be temporarily divide the island in two. Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland, give both parts home rule, and then that way, Northern Ireland, which is, again, mostly a unionist part, could have the ability to rule itself. It could have the ability to choose what it, what it does, and it could follow the UK and technically be a full-on part with no home rule, while the rest could do whatever, it wants to do as a free, independent, kind of home ruling area. Again, still in the UK, but ruling everything but like defense, currency, etc. Full on home rule. So now we've got that out of the way. How did that become, one, the Northern Ireland borders we see today? Because this doesn't quite match up with this in every single way. And two, how did that temporary border between two parts of the UK become a full on international border? And the simple explanation is that by the time the solution was actually implemented, Ireland was full on not only going for home rule, but for full on independence. Wars were happening, fighting was happening, and in the end, Ireland got its independence. However, the clause which was going to allow Northern Ireland to opt out still was in place, which meant that as soon as Ireland became independent, Northern Ireland used this kind of opting out, opting to become a separate territory, to become Northern Ireland, and then used the fact that it was a separate territory to become a part of the UK. You can say that in a lot of different ways, so you might hear the story as the reverse. Ireland managed to get independence, but then the British government took Northern Ireland away from them. You can hear this in a lot of different ways, but the majority of people in what was then Northern Ireland wanted to remain a part of the UK. And this is a compromise, seems kind of great on the surface, but it does raise the question of, one, if you're going to pick, because they picked 6 counties of Northern Ireland, why pick 6 counties, including ones, by the way, like, again, we look back at the map, you can see how the city of Derry very much, or Londonderry, whichever one you want to call it, very much didn't want to be a part of the UK. Why take that alongside with you? As well as, this county right here, this right here, why did you take some places that also didn't want to be there? And I guess the simple answer is like, okay, to keep things simple, but if you want to keep things simple, why not take the entire province of Ulster? Because obviously, some of the other counties were left to the side. There's a lot of questions as to why draw the lines where they were, and because they drew the lines where they were, where, again, the majority, a decent majority, like 2/3 of people in the Northern Irish area wanted to remain a part of the UK, why take a third with you when you didn't? But that's what happened. A majority of people in Northern Ireland wanted to remain a part of the UK, and therefore the two countries split. And when the two countries split, they had to enact an international border, because obviously for Ireland to properly have its own independent immigration and customs policies, they had to enforce custom posts and make this, again, what used to be a border between counties into a border between countries. And that's how the border came to be, and it kind of has remained exactly like that ever since. The old border between the counties, which were devised all the way back in the 1600s, these borders right here, became the basis of the border between countries. So the interesting thing about this, though, is the fact that even though Northern Ireland is kind of, it's the northern part of Ireland, the most northernmost part of Ireland is actually more northmost than the northmost part of Northern Ireland, so really you could argue that's the Northern Ireland. And two, the fact that Ireland just called itself Ireland, again, a lot of people call it the Republic to differentiate it, causes a lot of confusion about the two countries. Also there's the fact that Northern Ireland isn't actually a country on any official standard. You can call it a country, and sometimes people do, and sometimes some sports bodies do, but officially speaking, it is a territory according to the national, the NUTS, as well as, of course, there's the England, in a lot of cases, the UK calls it, a province. There's a lot of weird distinction about what it is. Does it have its own flag? I mean, sort of. Here's the official flag of Northern Ireland. So, I mean, as you can see, not really a unique flag. Here's the flag some people sometimes use, but this is just the Ulster banner. It's a non-official banner that represents Ulster as a whole, not even just Northern Ireland. It's super, super confusing. Also, look at that red hand. It makes me feel a tiny bit uncomfortable. Maybe it's just me. Maybe you think this is a swell flag. But long story short, there's a lot of really weird stuff when it comes to Northern Ireland and its status in the world. It is a part of the UK that exists because Ireland was split into two to allow, people who wanted to be a part of the UK to have their own thing. But it does mean that as time's gone on, things have changed a little bit. And how have things changed a little bit, you might question. And this implies that question is that lots and lots more people have become unionist inside Northern Ireland, and have become, the opposite in Northern Ireland. And because a lot of people who lived on the other side of the border have had their families separated by this hard border, long story short, the Troubles happened. So the Troubles, big issue happening in the 1960s to a lot longer than that. Here is in fact a graph showing the number of deaths per year. And a lot of people don't realize, again, if you weren't born in 1960 or 1970, which I wasn't either, that at one point before the modern age, terrorism didn't used to mean Islamic threat or this or that. It used to mean far left or far right people causing terror. And in this case, over 400 people died in 1 year because of terrorism. That's on both sides, by the way. Oh no, you make a both sides comment and that's a bad thing. But no, I mean, when it came to the Troubles, a lot of people from a lot of sides were fighting each other, and you can look up statistics that will tell you that the left-wing people killed more than the right-wing people, or the right-wing people killed more than the left-wing people. You can say either way, but long story short, people started killing each other over their ideology. Whether they wanted their country be independent or to be a part of the UK, started lead people to kill each other on a mass scale. It was known as the Troubles because the army had to be called in. It was a whole big crisis, and this is what terrorism meant. And it didn't only just happen in Northern Ireland, the areas affected. People started people started thinking that best way to cause change back home is to bomb Ireland and to bomb England and sometimes mainland Europe. People were bombing there was a lot of terrorism happening as a result of the troubles of this situation. That's why it was a big deal, and that's why in 1997 it was finally fixed for a bit, because the Good Friday Agreement was being negotiated and it finally came into effect in 1999. So the Good Friday Agreement was a really important agreement in the history of Ireland and Northern Ireland as a whole, because it normalised relations between the two and helped them to cooperate on areas such as policing, such as, getting rid of the weapons which had been building up over the last, 40 or 50 years. It was a way to, help with those sorts of things, as well as to ease cooperation between the UK and Ireland, the UK, its various island territories, and Northern Ireland and Ireland, by setting up a bunch of councils which would make it more possible to have a frictionless border. And that is what they did a lot of effort for. The Common Travel Area persists to this day, and one of the most important parts of it that a lot of people brush over is the fact that the Good Friday Agreement was when Ireland officially decided to drop its territorial claim to Northern Ireland. When Ireland had been founded, it believed it was the 32 counties and the 6 were kind of being occupied illegally. This was the first time they admitted okay, we'll drop our constitutional claim. However, one of the key provisions that nationalists on both sides kind of liked was that as soon as both Ireland and Northern Ireland agree via referendum, then the two sides can unite. And I think that is a pretty fair way to put it, as both sides can like that Northern Ireland can decide its own destiny, whether that be staying with the UK or whether that be joining Ireland. Also, Ireland itself has to agree, so even if Northern Ireland wants to join Ireland, they have to kind of do the whole thing. And this whole agreement, the Good Friday Agreement, was put to a vote on both sides of the island, and it was passed by a healthy majority in Northern Ireland and by an overwhelming majority in, let's just call it Southern Ireland, but in Ireland, the state to the south. So yeah, with that said, let's get into the borders now. Now you understand the key important Good Friday Agreement, let's talk about those borders. If we start, again, finally, I know we're 12 minutes in, talking about the border, you can see how, there's some weird situations, okay, there's a bit of a motorway here, an Irish motorway, which just belongs to the UK. You can see a very small part of it. It's not a big deal. Both sides just agree, I just drive over that stretch, it's fine, you can do what you want. It means there's a really weird thing where, again, let me show you the actual street view. There is a house to the side of the motorway here, which is a part of Northern Ireland, so this man who lives in the UK or Northern Ireland, whichever way you want to say it, this man who lives in this house sees a lot of Irish cars going from Ireland to Ireland, even though he lives in a different country, but it's fine. Again, it's all the same country, or it's all the same kind of thing right now. On a border level, there's no customs checks, there's no tricky stuff like that. If you live on either side of the border, it doesn't really matter as it exists today, which is why a border like this can exist. Again, if you look along the whole thing, it just kind of gets weirder, like, oh, half a road seems to exist on the Northern Irish side, but then any of the houses exist on the Irish side. It's like, what is this all about? How do you live in a different country to people on the opposite side of the road? But this is a normal thing in this part of the world. Having, you know, a street crossing, meaning a border crossing, this is how Northern Ireland just kind of works nowadays. And yeah, there's a lot of weird examples of this. Let's dive into them as we always like to do. So yeah, the border between Ireland and Northern Ireland, because it's mostly drawn by counties, is mostly just over some land. You can see it crossing roads and borders all the time. It's one of the most lax borders in the world, because both countries are part of a passport union, like as in the, not passport union, I guess a customs union as well as a territory union. It's pretty simple stuff. Both countries are part of the EU, and it's really easy to cross over from one side to the other. In fact, here you can see there's literally, you know, like a road where just like, oh yeah, midway through, it goes from the UK to Ireland. Again, not a big deal. You will see a road sign which will say something like, oh yeah, speed limits are now going to be in kilometers now as opposed to miles an hour. If you're in the south, it's in kilometers. If you're in the north, it's in miles. It's a small difference, but it is a difference. You'll see signs like that all over the place. Here's the reverse sign, like I said. It's to tell you that, like, oh yeah, speed limits are different to what's on your odometer. Work out the conversion rate, and you can see that's kind of the major difference. Your currency will change, your laws will change, and there are changes to living on each side, but if you're just transiting, or if you're selling goods across border from each other, it really won't affect things too much. So that's interesting, and you'll see how a lot of the landish area is affected that way, but a lot of the border is also done over river. So this is a really easy natural fortification, and it makes the border look pretty easily defendable. Like, oh yeah, so as you can see, covers a river right here for the most part, and then you get some weird parts where it doesn't quite follow the river. And a good example of this is just over here, where you can see that, again, it just kind of diverges from a river, goes into a few more locks, which, by the way, is that word right there is roughly pronounced lock. In again, it's hard to pronounce it properly, but it is, you know, you can see it roughly follows it, and then you see as things get to places like this, you start to see like border towns, which are like half on one side, half on the other. You start to see places like this where it diverges from the river. Again, right here, there is a clear river, which on both sides represents the border, but then for some reason it cuts across, and it means these people living on these farms live in Northern Ireland despite living on the other side of the border, and it means that, you know, properly enforcing checks on everything gets harder and harder and harder. If you wanted to do customs checks and you wanted to do immigration checks, you know, having a river border, really easy to stop people from swimming across with all their belongings, but if you have something like a border like this, well, it stops someone from running across that or something. It becomes a lot harder of a question. Side note, by the way, Ireland's Google Maps is a lot more blurry than the UK's. I don't know 100% why this is, but it doesn't apply to cities, so you can see, or towns, so you can see town, easy to see. Rest of it, super blurry, white scale almost. I don't understand. So yeah, with that said, back to the map, back to the border. Let's also talk about other things you'll see as you go along the border, because as well as seeing like kind of weird anomalies, like, okay, so it just cuts across right here, you'll also see as the, you know, the river flows on, you'll see just random gaps where this bit of land right here, despite being on the wrong side of the river, belongs to Ireland. So you could perform some satanic cult activities or whatever there, and be in a different jurisdiction, and just cross over from one to the other, and be under a different police service's remit. And the reason for stuff like this is the same one you'll see time and time again. It's because when the border was agreed, it was agreed down the path of the river. However, even though there is a river going around there, you can see the remnants of where it used to be. Rivers like to find shorter paths, which means that instead of going all the way around, the river decided, you know, we're going to cut through here slowly. Well, the river didn't decide, it's not a sentient being, but the river, like slowly over time, started to cut through there, and it meant the border did change. So again, if we want to go through every one of these examples, you can mostly just see that the border between Ireland and Northern Ireland has a whole bunch of weird examples, mostly being confined to rivers and such, but also then going through towns, going through roads. Again, you've seen so many examples, it's like, it's halfway, you know, this business park is halfway between the two sides, and it just mostly doesn't matter, because most of the time, it's not a big deal. However, most of the time isn't all the time, and that's where you get roads like this one. Again, it literally crosses from Ireland, Clones, by the way, a funny name for a village, it crosses from Ireland into the UK, into Ireland, into the UK, and then back into Ireland again. And the border along these places is also super, super rough and undefined. And although, because, you know, there aren't many people living here, it's not too big of a deal. Because there are no border controls, it's not too big of a deal. But it does mean that there's a very weird road right here, which would cause serious issues. Because from this road, you can take a turning into Northern Ireland. From this road, you can go back into Ireland. You can do all these different things. By the way, this is almost an exclave. It's a functional exclave of Ireland, where these people living in Clooney, all of this farmland is technically a part of Ireland, but it's only connected to Ireland by this very thin stretch right here, which, as you can see, let's just quickly measure the distance, is 110 meters wide and goes across a river. There is no functional way to get from this part of Ireland to the rest of Ireland. You can see how stuff like this is oh so common along the border between the two places. And yeah, the simple answer right now is, oh, well, I mean, it's easy enough to just kind of accept things, but the number of border crossings that would be required is kind of absurd. The number of ways you have to police this is really, really high. And that's something I really want to just stress in this video, that trying to enforce a border here is both tricky, expensive, and not desired by residents, because you see towns like this one right here. So this is Balik on the right, and then on the left it's again, people offended by my pronunciations of things, I'm sorry. So there are two towns right here, but you can see how both towns, they're connected by these same bus services. Bus Iran, for instance, runs services from a lot of Northern Irish towns into Ireland, and TransLink, which is the Northern Irish government's public transport operator, operates a lot of buses from Ireland into Northern Ireland, and vice versa. These things just happen, both kind of countries, despite having a different currency, a different health system, which means you have to have separate like infrastructures for stuff like that. Different, lots of different things, because by the way, healthcare is free in the UK, but not free in Ireland. Postal services, entirely done differently. Stuff like that does change, but for day-to-day life, there are just parts of towns that exist across a river and across a border. So yeah, you can see, again, another example right here, where like these people, they need to cross the river, cross the border to go to a pub. Are you going to deny them access to their pub? I mean, you could do so. Or you could just, put a border in there, which is going to be hard to go across at 4 a.m. on the way home. You can see the basic point where, like, there's just lots of these fun things. And then we get to Londonderry or Derry. So this is a place so offensive to say a name of that Google Maps just decided it's called Londonderry now. Have your name, have both names, because Londonderry is a name given to it by the UK, because you can imagine it's London then Derry, whereas Derry is the name that people, a lot of people like to call it, partly because it's simpler, and partly because, oh, London is that bad place we do not like. Again, complex, simple breakdown of a complex situation, but basically it is a place that is very controversial and is where a lot of the troubles happen. And like I said earlier, including this in Northern Ireland was arguably quite a bad idea. In fact, I wouldn't say arguably, it was pretty much a bad idea, because the city of Londonderry did not want to be a part of the United Kingdom, but the areas around it kind of did. So we have this border, again, of a city which is very much nationalist, very much Sinn Féin, etc. But then you have it surrounded by areas which aren't, and this causes tensions, and this causes things like the Troubles. So it also causes, by the way, one of the weirdest borders, because instead of following the border down the river, nice logical place for it, it means there's a big surrounding city area which is part of the UK, as opposed to being part of Ireland, which also means, fun little fact here, this right here, this is Lough Foyle. It was a really important World War II situation. The UK really badly needed to use this area for transporting ships across the northwest route of the UK. To keep things simple, they wanted to get stuff from there to there, wanted to keep things safe, they needed escort ships, so they decided to make a base over here. It's gone now, but there was a base, and they decided, like, oh man, we can't impeach, Ireland's neutrality. We can't bypass that, so we're going to have to work out who owns this, and they kind of concluded, like, we're not sure who owns it, but for the purpose of this war, you can say you do. So yeah, that's a fun example of like the border between the two countries, where they never really clearly worked out who owns this, so it's kind of like, well, I mean, neither of us needs to, so let's leave that conveniently undefined. And again, I just think that's kind of an interesting side of the two countries you might not realize. Also, there's a place called Muff here, so fun name for a place. And also, the city of Derry Airport is one of the only free functioning commercial civilian airports in Northern Ireland. There is 2 for Belfast, and there is 1 for the city of Derry, and because there are so few airports on the island, but also in Northern Ireland, a lot of people, even from Ireland, will cross the border to go to Derry's airport. Like if you live in, for instance, Letterkenny, I had an ex-girlfriend who had family there, went there a lot, you'll go to Derry's airport because it's the closest airport to you, so a lot of people will cross the border to go to their nearest airport, to go to the nearest city, because Londonderry is like the 4th or 5th biggest city on the island of Ireland. There is a lot of reasons to cross this border a lot of the time. And I think we've gone over that enough. I've made the point enough times. Why am I saying that so often? Why is it so important that border crossings happen? And that is because Brexit means you need to do one of 3 things which do cause issues. So if you want to, so if the UK wants to leave the EU and leave the things which it mostly does not like about the EU, it needs to implicate a border between itself and the EU. It needs to have customs checks and immigration checks. Because otherwise, if you don't have immigration checks between the UK and another place, then even though they can't get to mainland Great Britain, if you can get to Northern Ireland and then across to the Great Britain, it doesn't, defeats the point. So you need to secure the border between Northern Ireland and Ireland. However, Securing the border, ooh, that's going to cause some issues. Remember that graph I showed you earlier? That feels like that could get higher. So, okay, that's off the table. Can't secure the border, at least practically speaking. Okay, so we can't secure the border down. Ireland doesn't want it. The UK doesn't want it. The EU doesn't want it. No one wants that to be done. At least that's what they've said publicly. I mean, again, you know how these geopolitical things play out. But if you can't do that, then the second thing you can do is make a border between Great Britain and the UK. You can make Northern Ireland a part of the, the EU, whatever else, but you want to make a border between it and the rest of the UK, which kind of exists right now. However, the Unionists, again, who are still the majority, not by as much, but still are the majority of Northern Ireland, would not be happy with that. That is effectively making them a separate part of the UK, not what you want if you believe that you are a part of the UK, so that's not okay either. No sea border between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK, and it's like, okay then, so we can't do either of those two things. Third option is to accept customs and border checks, which essentially means you don't get a benefit from Brexit. If you want to leave the EU because you want to sign your own trade deals, or because you want to, make your own immigration policies, the two big things I think most people would say they're in favour of. Again, the people who voted for leaving the EU and the people who want to implement it. It's like you can't do that while having customs and immigration come from the EU freely, because those are the two big issues, again, for the UK. You can argue whether they're issues or not. I would say arguably not, arguably so. But the point is, those three issues all cause contention, don't work. And that means there are only three wild solutions you can go with to fix this issue. Unless something changes, unless someone is willing to accept something new to make one of those three solutions happen, either the British people, the Northern Irish and EU governments, or I guess the the EU as a whole. You have to get someone to break one of their major principles, or you have to do something radical. And that means there are three radical solutions, all of which are wildly undesirable. One, Northern Ireland goes independent or becomes a part of Ireland, more realistically, which again, not desirable to the UK for partly, but also not desirable for Northern Ireland. They don't. Even though a lot of people would be happy with it from both parts, it's not a majority opinion. That is something they don't really want to have happen. So if you can't do that, it's like, okay, you do no Brexit. So we don't leave the EU. We accept that the border just causes too many issues, except one. I mean, again, regardless of what you think about whether Brexit is a good idea or not, I think most people think it's going horrifically right now. It does raise the thing of so we voted for something and then just decided it's too hard and gave up. Not a good message to send as a country, even if you could get the political, points to do it. Okay, can't do that then. So third solution is no deal Brexit, which is where you just kind of don't sign a deal and try to leave the border up for as long as you can, and then hope that Ireland doesn't do it too, and you have this unofficial open border that allows you to achieve all your objectives. But again, the realm of issues this causes basically means this doesn't function as a solution, because again, if the EU just puts up a border, you can say it's their fault, but then also the border is there regardless. So yeah, long story short, this is the biggest geopolitical border challenge of modern times. How do you deal with it? In my opinion, again, so this is my guess. When it comes to modern day politics, it's hard to make accurate guesses. I think there's going to be something that has to give, because Northern Ireland, by the way, they prop up the current government, which is the Conservative and Unionist Party. Big issue when it comes to unionism. I think that Northern Ireland is either going to accept, or they're going to, another party somewhere is going to allow the Conservatives to just make a sea border. Because right now, there is effectively a sea border between the two countries anyway. If you want to get to Northern Ireland, you have to show ID. You can't just hop over there, even though it's a domestic flight. And usually people bring their passports with them. And customs checks between two countries, although that sounds like, oh, you have to check all the bags. It's like you check 5% or something. The Norway-Sweden border shows that you can check bags, you can check, stuff like that. Only doing it 1% of the time and still be effective. People don't want to be caught out that 1% of the time, so just check 1% of people. Doesn't really slow down most people and most trade and most goods. And it's like, okay, so what about immigration? It's like, okay, either accept the single market principles and do that, or don't accept them and just make the Northern Ireland people have a special immigration section or something, or just again have enough capacity for that. There you go, easy solution. But again, it's unlikely, because Northern Ireland and the party in charge right there does not want that at all. They want Northern Ireland to be just like the rest of the UK, and that means that a hard border in particular, might come up, and if a hard border comes up, that is very, 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 very worrying. And yeah, long story short, rock in a hard place, and another rock, and another hard place, and the UK is in the center of that, like with Ireland, and they're like cuddling together, like, what do we do? What do we do? We can't work it out. And yeah, we'll see the solutions to that at some point soon. I think, again, if I had to make another wild prediction, because honestly, at this point, no one has any clue. Everyone keeps saying, what are we going to do about it? And they come up with some wild, unworkable solution. So the other thing that might happen is, the solution everyone hates, but just staying in the single market, the customs union, like perpetually, and saying, oh yeah, let's deal with that eventually, and then never dealing with it until Northern Ireland wants to reunify, because statistically speaking, at some point, the Catholics, the Unionists, are reproducing more, so if you assume that it's based on religion, which a lot of people still think it is, then eventually that happens. Again, there is no easy solution. Every solution is offensive. People hate me for saying all of the words I just have. But yeah, that is why this is the biggest geopolitical challenge of all time. It's a border which came about less than 100 years ago, based on one over 400 years old. It's got so many, just weird bits to it, where it just makes it almost unfunctional to try and cut the two things apart. You can draw a new border, you can try and put up a hard border, but all of these things are going to upset some number of people. And yeah, long story short, there's a big issue when it comes to Northern Ireland, and that is why a country of like roughly 1.5 million people, a territory, a area of 1.5 million people, is causing a big issue for a bloc of 500 million. Because this is a big issue for the EU, this is a big issue for the UK, and I find it interesting that stuff like this comes up on such a frequent basis. So finally, before we go, I want to mention a fun fact, because Northern Ireland, like I said, I find it to be a really interesting place. One of the wild bits you might not even realize is the fact that they have, like Belfast in particular, the capital city, has so many issues in terms of this unionism thing. So you see, for instance, something called the peace walls. It's huge walls this big to separate, unionist communities from nationalist communities. Oh look, someone. I don't know what that's all about. But they put up huge walls like this to kind of separate people. But then if you look over it on the other side, you can see that, like, wow, you had to build that wall just to separate the the Irish Republicans or the nationalists from the separatists. The flags, these flags, this represents, I like the UK, and the Irish flag represents, yeah, let's get out of here. There is genuine issues to this day with petrol bombs being thrown over. The reason the wall has to be extended with this huge thing up there is people would throw petrol bombs across it, across their own street to another one. Streets are divided, so many places are divided with huge walls like this. Yeah, that's something you don't realize. A modern day city, Belfast, one of the second largest city on the island of Ireland, one of the largest cities in the UK, still has areas where it's divided, and although they want to bring down those walls, it is, it's important to mention just how big of a thing that it is, in my opinion. But yeah, with that said, final thing about Northern Ireland is that Northern Irish people, or Scots-Irish, or Ulster-Irish, whatever you want to call them for the purpose of this video, around 1.5 million people live in Northern Ireland. However, the majority of Ulster-Irish people, of Irish Scots, of, again, whatever you want to call them, don't live in Northern Ireland. The majority of people of that descent live in America, and in fact, one of the fun facts is they're the most spread out community across America. They don't make up more than 2.9% in any state, which means that, yeah, most Northern Irish people don't live in Northern Ireland, they live in America and other places around the world. And I was considering making a video about all of the weirdest examples of this, because there's so many weird examples. Like, there's the city in America where more Bosnians live than I think in Bosnia itself. There's so many weird just places like this where more people live outside the borders of the country than within it. Would you like to see a video on that? Or do you think that, it's okay, you've offended me too much, you said that Northern Ireland and Ireland were separate countries, just because it's a reality right now doesn't mean I don't hate you for it. Wow, why aren't you saying what you want to be reality rather than what reality is? So many people hate me for saying how things are right now. So I'm sorry for those people, but that's what I do on this channel. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed it. If you want to leave an intelligent piece of feedback on Reddit, you can do so. That's where I read the comments the most and kind of trust them. On YouTube, it's just going to be a whole bunch of people saying, "Oh, my side! I hate your side! I hate this and that." But on Reddit, if you want to give me a reasonable comment, I will read it and I'll give you a response. So thank you very much for watching this video, and I'll see you all next time. Goodbye. Oh wait, second channel, don't care.